right? And when we talk about this idea of prevention, what we call the byline in the book, what we call prevention is intimidating the Palestinian population.
To protest strip mining, two men climbed 200 feet up a crane and unfurled a banner. Hello, my name is Stanley Heller. Welcome to The Struggle. The Struggle is shown on 21 cable stations from Vermont to New York City, on the internet at thestruggle.org. The bulk of our program today is about the routine harassment and intimidation of Palestinians by Israeli army forces in the West Bank, as told by a former active-duty Israeli soldier, Avner Gvaryahu. You heard part one of his talk last week. Gvaryahu was on a book tour for the book Our Harsh Logic, published on behalf of the Israeli soldiers group Breaking the Silence. Then a minute or so to talk about a very bold action by those protesting mountaintop removal. In Stamford, Connecticut, several men climbed up a crane and unfurled a banner. The action resulted in the arrest of over 12 people. We begin in New Haven with former Israeli paratrooper and sniper Avner Gvaryahu.
And maybe the top or the peak of this reality of having your presence felt, the peak of this reality of prevention is this order, having your presence felt, right? Showing that you're constantly there. You're constantly in control. Now the idea is that you will be in every moment, in every time, in every second. One of the best examples of that is Hebron. This picture, by the way. In Hebron, as we're sitting here now, there are two patrols walking around the city. And their orders are, have your presence felt. How do you have your presence felt in a city like Hebron? You randomly enter houses. So you start a shift, go into a house, middle of the night, wake everyone up, women to the right side, men to the left, check IDs, search the house, go out of the balcony, down to the roof, into another house, check another house. You know, this is a routine. It could be 5, 6, 7 houses. Now this is something we have to understand. This isn't, one brute soldier that decides I'll take matters into my own hand. This is something that everyone knows has been going on. No one is even questioning it. One of the interesting testimonies that comes up, these, by the way, are pictures from inside houses, right? In straw widows. In the rest, you go in and take someone, but in a straw widow, you sit in the house. One of the testimonies that comes up over and over, almost every 4 years, when there's a big soccer game. Right? So soldiers are angry they're missing the game. They look for a Palestinian house with a satellite TV, enter the house, lock the family in a room, sit and watch the game. Now, understanding this, I think, is very important, right? Besides us feeling that this is something we're not comfortable with, right, and something we have to understand how powerful this system is. Because the Israeli army's mission today is that every Palestinian will think that there's a soldier right here, behind his shoulder. Right? We have to be everywhere, every time, every second. And there's a term in Hebrew, it's called Yetzirat Chushat Nirdafut, creating the sense that they're being chased constantly. These are the orders the soldiers got. You have to create the sense of that they are being chased. Bughi Elon, who is now the Minister of Defense in Israel, used to be the Chief of Staff, he coined the phrase to brand the Palestinian consciousness. What does branding the Palestinian consciousness look like? Exactly like this. I want to just give one more example, then I'll show a short clip, which sadly we don't have the sound for it, but it's in Hebrew and there's subtitles in English, so you'll have to trust me that the subtitles in English are actually what the soldier is saying, for those of you that understand Hebrew. But I think that one of the interesting testimonies that today is coming up over and over is something, again, could maybe surprise you, something called mock arrests, fake arrests, right? Where the actual mission is to enter someone's house. You only let someone enter that guy's house after you know from the Secret Service that he is not a threat. So he's an innocent person, innocent family. You enter the house, take the head of the family like a real arrest, tie his eyes, his hands, drive to the base. He'll sometimes spend the night and find the way back. Now what does this do? The first thing, when I did this, and I did a fake straw widow, when I did this, I thought the sole purpose was to train us as soldiers. And I thought, that's crazy. But it sort of ended there because, okay, it happened once, twice, but then we continued on to the real deal. What we knew how to justify to ourselves. But the much more important thing that it does is the ripples, right? It creates this sense of fear. When the soldiers are there in any moment, if you know your neighbor who is living his life like Mahatma Gandhi and doing everything he can to send his children to school and is going, with the law and, is doing, which is something that isn't easy to do when you're under occupation, right? But he decides to do that, but he'll still be arrested, then why should I even try to go in the official system? Why should I even try to go and get my working permit if I could just jump over the fence? Because anyway, they're treated, at the end of the day, all like potential threats. And I remember this, when I was serving, we stopped talking about, after I finished my training, we stopped talking about innocent Palestinians, and we started talking about Palestinians who were not involved. Right? How powerful the terminology is. I want to do this one video. He served in the Nachal Brigade in Hebron. There are posts that surround the Jewish settlement, and there are 24-hour patrols. They're called Patrol 30. 6 soldiers inside the western Kasbah. And their objective, the military security objective, is to remove the threat from the Jewish settlement, to be amongst the enemy. Now, the enemy is actually a bunch of very impoverished civilians. And how do you do this? How do you remove the threat when the threat can be anyone? Because you really don't know who's the threat. You just have to, what we did, we were told, this is not a patrol. You have to create the sense of security, the sense of, you can create the sense of persecution. You have to be under their feet all the time. So the army can, so they'll know the army's in the Kasbah. So the Palestinians know the army can be anywhere, at any given time. How is this done? For example, we used to enter abandoned houses, and our commander had a red laser on his rifle. And he would project the laser into the middle of the day on the passing vendors and peoples. There's nothing violent about it. So they always knew we were there. The army's there at every given moment. We would often set up random checkpoints. We would hide behind houses, behind doors and alleys. And we would jump out at people, search them, and then move on. Our commander said we must create a sense of persecution. I think it was written on the assignment sheets and before every patrol. This is a soldier who served in Hebron till 2010, if I'm not mistaken. If you read our testimonies from Hebron, we know Hebron very, very well. This comes up over and over and over again, this idea. Now, I'll conclude this chapter, this idea of prevention, which using a term from the world of human rights, which in that sense we don't see ourselves as the classic human rights organization. But if for a second we'll use that terminology, today we don't really, with our actions, and these actions, don't see a difference between an armed Palestinian and a civilian. And in that sense, what we're doing is a form of collective punishment. Right? And when we talk about this idea of prevention, what we call the byline in the book, what we call prevention is intimidating the Palestinian population. We will only feel our security if the Palestinians will constantly feel threatened. Now the second chapter, and I'll just run through the rest of the chapters very quickly. The second chapter is the chapter of separation. I think most people at least thinking about this idea of separation today, thinking we're separating Israelis from Palestinians. But actually what we're spending most of our efforts doing is separating Palestinians from Palestinians. Right? Palestinians in the West Bank and in Gaza, Palestinians in Israel in the West Bank and Gaza. In the West Bank itself, the West Bank is divided into 5 different regions. And to drive through them, you need different permits. It depends when throughout the past decade, right? But you have to cross checkpoints, right? A carpenter from Hebron wants to pass his merchandise up to Nablus or to the market of Jenin. Sometimes have to cross 3 or 4 or 5 regions. But we're also separating Palestinians from each other inside cities, like Hebron, for example, which is divided into 2 parts. And we're also separating Palestinians from their land, right? With different mechanisms, with different ways, not only with the separation barrier, but around settlements. You have something called a Shabam, a special security area, and whatnot. Now, this idea of separation, which we think is only there for this idea of security, is actually doing something much more impressive if you think about it. It's basically this idea of dividing and conquering, right? If the Palestinians do not have this continuity, right? If you can't really create the sense of community, but the sense of statehood or community, or but you actually can you have these small enclaves that are very separated. It's much easier to control. And in that sense, the separation is maybe a continuation of this idea of prevention, right? How do we prevent? We will separate, right? And we'll do whatever we need in order to prevent. The 3rd chapter. Right, and those of you that know the map of Israel, for us say a word more about separation. For example, the Jordan Valley, which I think is extremely interesting in that sense, and understanding what's happening today in the Jordan Valley. People in the Jordan Valley are slowly being disconnected from other parts of the West Bank. It's very difficult to get merchandise there. It's very, very difficult to live there now with this. With no connections to water or building permits and whatnot. But in that sense, the Jordan Valley, the South Hebron Hills, all of Area C, very interesting to learn about. I won't get into that. Fabric of life, right? The 3rd chapter of the book is this idea of fabric of life. And when you hear this idea, what could be wrong with fabric of life, right? Allowing the Palestinians to maintain their fabric of life. But in that sense, this is what we always have to keep in mind. It's always in the mercy of the occupier. We'll always hold this other side of the rope, and we will decide how much to give and how much to take. First time here, we actually have testimonies of soldiers from the civil administration, a body that's run under the Ministry of Defense. Now it's half a civilian body, and in the civil administration you have people who are settlers, for example, who work there. The civil administration is in charge of administrating Palestinian life. Right? And they decide how much of this fabric of life will they give and how much will they take. How many permits will they give for Palestinians to work in Israel? How many permits will they give for Palestinians to go to hospitals in Israel? How many permits will they give for Palestinians to leave Israel? It's all in our hands. Now there's different levels of control. How much we're giving this rope, how much we're taking the rope. Go to Ramallah today, in the heart of Ramallah. Much less of an army presence than there was 10 years ago. There's a cafe, there's nightlife, there's businesses. But go to anywhere around Area C, you can't stand in one place for 5 minutes and not see an army present there. And a Palestinian living in this area, if he wants to build a house, connect the house to water, connect the house to electricity, build a mosque, build a school, it's not up to a Palestinian municipal body or representatives of the people, It's not by the people for the people. It's by Israel for Israel. Right? And in that sense, the civil administration will always decide in Israel's interest. And what we see today is that Israel's interest is to minimize Palestinian presence in Area C. Right? And we see demolitions of houses and demolitions of schools and demolitions of mosques and whatnot. And there's a lot of battles in this now, and there was just a big story in a firing zone in the South Hebron Hills. Don't know if you follow this, firing zone 198, 918. But in that sense, we're using different tools in order to minimize the Palestinian presence there. Of course, not allowing the fabric of life there. But also inside Ramallah. I mean, even inside Ramallah, Israel has control, right? It could be from a small thing of allowing, 3G cell phones, right? Or there's no heavy industry in Ramallah. Not by chance. So when we talk about this idea of control, at least for a lot of Israelis, we don't control Area A, Ramallah, the big cities, Bethlehem, Jenin. But of course we do. And we can decide how much to control and how much to take back. There's a lot to be said about Gaza as well, but there's a different kind of control, but of course we also control Gaza. Right? I mean, we have testimonies of people in the Navy SEALs, right? Preventing fishermen. I mean, we saw someone talking about this. This is happening. Israel, of course, this was released, counts the amount of calories that a Palestinian is eating inside Gaza. So in that sense, when we're talking about this a reality of control and fabric of life, we always have to remember that it's always in the grace of the occupier. Now, the last chapter, I think this is where I'll end, and I'd be happy to open this up for some questions or a discussion. This idea of law enforcement, this last chapter, is the first time ever that we bring in this idea of settlers and settlements. Right? And we've been talking about the occupation in the West Bank, and I hardly brought up this idea of settlers and settlements. Now, not by chance, first of all, because it's very important for us to remember that the settlers and the settlements living on the ground today, about 350,000 of them, could not be there a second without the support of Israel's government and Israel's army. Right? And I'm sure you know this, but what we talk about is this triangle of control. Right? Where today, the settlers, the government, and the army are maintaining this reality. Now, when we talk about law enforcement, and in the book we talk about law enforcement, we talk about this dual regime, right? I don't know how many of you know this. I'm sure those of you dealing with this reality are aware of the fact that today in the West Bank, right, there's more or less 2.5 million Palestinians, 350,000 settlers, that are living sometimes house in front of house, village in front of village, city next to city, but they're living under two separate laws. Right? Palestinians are living under army martial law. Israelis are living under the same law I live in Tel Aviv. Now, how does this come into effect? I mean, besides the mental effect that it has on, everyone serving there, all the soldiers, right? Because it's not only that there's something wrong with the soldiers, doesn't see the Israelis and the Palestinians as equal. If he would see them as equal, that would be something wrong with them, because the law doesn't allow them to be equal. So if you have two children throwing stones at cars, an Israeli and a Palestinian, in Hebron, both could happen. I'm in Hebron 3 times a week. I was stoned both by Israelis and by Palestinians. Let's say the kids are both caught, and they're both over the age of 12, because under the age of 12, they can't be prosecuted, even though I think a month and a half ago a 5-year-old was detained. Palestinian 5-year-old was detained by an Israeli soldier. But let's for a second put that aside. Let's only talk about the law. Underneath the law that's today in the West Bank, you can arrest these two children that did the exact same thing. Maybe they threw the same rock on the same car and the same... If they'll be caught and sent to be tried, the Israeli child could not be held for more than 12 hours before seeing a judge. 12 hours passed, doesn't see a judge, judge has to be sent home. Palestinian child, we could hold him up to 4 days. Right? How long can you hold them before seeing a lawyer? 2 if you're Israeli, 90 if you're Palestinian. How long can you be held up before pressing charges. 40 if you're Israeli, 180 if you're Palestinian. This continues on, but eventually, how many Israeli children are sitting in prison? None. How many Palestinians go to Kele Ofer? This happens. They're there. They're sitting in prison. So when we're talking, and this is only, of course, children are always emotional. We have to understand that this is a reality that separates not only children but adults. I mean, every Palestinian is tried as a potential terrorist. Right? In that sense, it doesn't matter. I can commit a crime. A settler can commit a crime. We know it's something you can do. There's a punishment, but I also have my rights as an Israeli citizen, as a civilian. In that sense, it is fair to say that when Israel looks at this reality and why they're doing this, a lot of it is at least what Israel calls security. But, and this is something we have to say clearly, it's a distorted idea of security. Right? It's this idea which maintains this reality of a zero-sum game. Right? It's either us or it's them. And Israel says it's either us or it's them, so of course it's us. Besides the responsibilities that Israel has for the Palestinians, this isn't bringing us anywhere. The contra is actually happening. Like we said, this is entrenching ourselves in this reality. In Hebron, end of 2008, we have a testimony of soldiers that on the pillbox, on the guarding post, they had their orders written black and white, and the orders were to disrupt the day-to-day life of the Palestinian population. Now, today Israel sees its security as ultimate control over Palestinians. And Ramallah is a very good example, because today Ramallah is not questioning Israel's control. Go 20 minutes out of Ramallah to Nebi Salah. There's a Palestinian popular resistance there. Every Friday there's demonstrations. Out of 500 people living there, 250 have been to prison. Dozens have been injured. 2 have been killed. As Nebi Saleh, this farmer's neighborhood with 500 people is questioning Israel's security? No. It's questioning our control. And that's why we're always going to be in this cycle. We're always going to be in this reality, because we'll always want to control the Palestinians. They'll never want to be under our control. So we'll always be in this cycle. We'll never have this ultimate security that we're seeking. Now, I think talking about breaking our silence, I think this is it's important to say, we don't think that silence is an Israeli epidemic. Right? Silence is something that has to be broken in many places around the world. But there is a uniqueness to this reality that we're in. First of all, it's unique because for us it's unique because it's our country, and it's the army we served in. I think, speaking to you as Americans, there is a very important a connection between Israel and the U.S., not only financial, but also. But talking about this reality in the West Bank, unlike other places, and there's a lot of criticism in other places as well, which is important to voice, but even if it's not working, for example, Iraq and Afghanistan, at least they're saying, and they're trying to win hearts and minds. They're not thinking that eventually they'll stay. It's when are we going to leave? We're going to leave yesterday, we're going to leave tomorrow, or in 10 years from now. In Israel, that's not the discussion. No one is talking about when we will leave. And the actions on the ground actually show the opposite. How can we make sure we're staying?
Near towns and homes, they blast 1,000 feet off the top of mountains to get easy access to the coal. The rubble they throw down into the valleys, sometimes covering whole streams. This is extreme strip mining. It's been opposed and protested by people in Appalachia for years. A big financier of this mining is UBS, the Swiss banking company. It has its U.S. headquarters in Stamford, Connecticut. On November 24th, UBS tried to pretty its image with a parade in Stamford. Folks from Hands Off Appalachia draped this banner to be visible on the route. The next day, 2 men climbed a crane working on a building opposite UBS headquarters and unfurled this banner. Then there was a banner drop inside the UBS headquarters. Dustin Steele and Ricky Draper locked down inside the building. 14 people were arrested, some far away from the buildings, all charged with conspiracy and other crimes. Bail ranged from $10,000 to $20,000. For more information, see handsoffAppalachia.com. Before we go to items, the situation in Gaza grows worse. The region's only power plant has been shut for weeks now. Garbage trucks, which rely on fuel, have all been stopped. Mountains of trash and millions of flies are everywhere. And mention of worldwide demonstrations against the Israeli Prower plan. This is the idea to go to the Negev desert and displace and remove 40 to 70,000 Bedouin Palestinians and put in their place Jewish settlements. One of the protests against it is being lodged by Jewish Voice for Peace. Go to their website for more information. And that's our program for today. See you next week at this time. I'm Stanley Heller, and this is The Struggle.